Are you?
This was a land area largely by farmers in the state of Massachusetts, and the number of participants was greater than the populations of several of the states at the time they were in its beginning. Yet it all happened so quickly that studying this phenomenon is almost like watching a high-speed moving camera. Truly, this affords the historian a unique opportunity of witnessing the entire frontier experience in a condensed. Now, there are several reasons I know that its proper name is the Cherokee outlet. It was granted to the Cherokee Nation upon their arrival to Indian Territory as an outlet from their reservation in northeastern Oklahoma to the buffalo hunting grounds on the Great Plains. The real Cherokee Strip was a very narrow little strip of land between Oklahoma and Kansas that was disputed because of a surveyor's error and was resolved by a new survey several years prior to the opening of the outlet. Still, the name Cherokee Strip persists to this day. Now, I'm not trying to change the habits of a lifetime. I will simply surrender factual scholarship to popular practice and will refer your answer to the Cherokee Strip. It is also popularly believed, and many very reliable textbooks foster the myth, that the entire strip was occupied in the few hours after the firing of that fateful shot at high noon, September the 16th, 1893. In fact, it is an often told tale that literally thousands of disappointed home seekers dejectedly began their long return homeward the next morning because there was not enough land for everyone. Nothing could be farther from the truth. It is true that the better, well-watered lands in the eastern portion of the state were all taken, and that thousands did fail to secure the homestead in this preferred section. But the far western portion, what is now Harper, Ellis Woods, and Woodward County, were hardly occupied at all. In fact, in the evidence that I've been able to gather, roughly only about 3% of all the available land in the state. And it would not be until the Free Homes Act of 1900 that the remaining land would be occupied. This far western portion of the strip was too dry to sustain agriculture on a 160-acre basis, and the farmers who ran were wiser than the government. They would not gamble that they could endure on such a farm for the 5 years required by law to prove up a claim. And certainly they weren't going to pay $1 an acre for such a land. Another persistent myth has it that all this vast expanse of land was an agrarian paradise, a veritable garden of Eden. But we who lived here and have traveled across it know otherwise. West of the 98th meridian, which is just west of Fairview, there isn't sufficient rainfall to sustain agriculture, even with dry land farming techniques, which weren't even heard of in 1893. The federal government knew full well that this portion of the strip was not suited to small farms. Geological reports to the Department of the Interior as early as 1872 and 73, 20 years before the run, clearly stated that most of this land in the words of that report, not suited for agriculture, not suited for grazing, and some described as totally unfit for anything. Yet the federal government came in and carved up the land into small 160-acre farms and encouraged settlers to homestead. In the process, thousands of people with high hopes were crushed by the forces of nature. Even those in the more fertile, well-watered eastern portions faced terrible hardships those first years. The year 1893 was not a fortuitous year. There was drought throughout the West. Gardens and crops sprang from the earth only to wither under the scorching winds. In addition, the entire nation was wallowing in depression. This was the panic of 1893, and economic recovery did not come to the nation until the fall of 1896. Thus, it was not until the years of 1896-97 that the strippers, as they were called, began to prosper to any degree. That year, they harvested their first good crops, and at the same time received a good price at the marketplace. A search of the diaries and interviews with the several old settlers reveals that in these years they began to emerge from the ground literally from their soddies and dugouts. They began to build new frame homes, barns, and other improvements. The purchase of farm machinery and livestock also began. Economic prosperity had at last appeared on the strip, and the hardest part of that frontier experience was in the past. The strippers celebrated their bountiful harvest by attending the Ringling Brothers Circus in Enid that summer. Tens of thousands packed into the big top to standing room only performances. Not much of a reward for the hardships and deprivation of 4 years, but these hardy people did not demand much for themselves, and they counted themselves as among the more fortunate of this earth. The normal vicissitudes of agrarian economics continued, of course. Many would fail because of unavoidable adversity or unwise farming practice or poor management. Yet others at the very same time prospered, and a few grew rich in the very same community and under the same circumstances. But that is the nature of things. In rather short order, the residents of the Cherokee Strip joined their neighbors as residents of Oklahoma Territory, and in equally short time, they joined the Union as a state. The people and this land have become totally integrated into the state and the nation. The Cherokee Strip is no longer discernible. It can be located today only by historical highway markers and in the minds of those who participated in that great event, or by those who have experienced it vicariously through the study of history. But what does it all mean to us today? True, it is an exciting story of a brave and hardy people who gambled the day that prevailed against the forces of nature. They sunk their plows into a virgin land, and by blood, sweat, and tears, they transformed a seed of grass into an ocean of waving grain and modern cities. The story of how people changed the land is indeed an interesting and dramatic story in itself, but that is not the whole of it. How the land changed the people is even more interesting and important, and that is going to be the basis of my thesis. If it be true that the frontier shaped the character of America, and that the farther west one travels, the more Americans become, then surely here, on America's last frontier, we should find those characteristics which distinguish Americans in greater abundance than anywhere else in all the nation. And from what I've been able to learn from my studies, I believe this is true. You see, on the frontier, man stood naked before nature. He was stripped of all of his institutions of the past. He did not have to win his freedom. It was imposed upon him, and he could not escape. He had to devise new institutions in order to live in such a state of freedom. He had to form a government for free men, democracy. He had to form a religion for free men, Protestantism. And at economic system for free and capitalism. These have been the dominant institutions of America, and they were frontier born. Foreign ideologies and issues have found no welcome in the minds of frontiersmen, who are too busy in the exercise of daily freedom to govern themselves, to earn their daily bread, and of making a place for themselves in eternity to listen to foreign isms and ideologies. And here in America's vast frontier, we find that the people's faith in those institutions remain unshaken. Are you, those who made that historic run, and those who are the sons and daughters, the most American of Americans? I believe that you are, but you are here to be the judge. But, let me ask, how can we measure character? How can we weigh the intangible? My answer, by their fruit ye shall know them. Just look around this nation today, and I think you will see what I'm talking about. In the older, more crowded sections of this nation, we see strange sights and hear unfamiliar sounds. From the teeming cities, we hear that God is dead. But here, on America's vast frontier, He's very much alive. From the older regions of our nation, we hear that capitalism has outlived its usefulness, and that socialism can perhaps solve the inequities caused by the free enterprise system. And we also witness the desecration of our flag and the burning of draft cards and the denunciation of our government. Yet the faith of the people on the last frontier remains unshaken in the institutions which were the product of that frontier and upon which this nation's greatness was built. The dissidents among us are few in number, and the faith of our fathers still burns brightly in the hearts of the sons and daughters. The way you vote, the way you worship, and the way you make your living all betray you. The frontier has made you the most American of the Americans. And since there are no more frontiers, those institutions which were born on the frontier are threatened as never before. There are those who believe that with the passing of the frontier, those institutions of the frontier have outlived their usefulness and must give way to new ideologies. I don't know. I only hope that it isn't true. Only time will tell. But in the meantime, the issue rests in your hands.
I'm going to leave out a lot of people that I need to thank. Anytime you have an office in an organization this type, you have an awful lot of good help. Really, everyone out here is helping. The fact that you're here today, that we can continue once a year to remember and make an effort to come is to there are